If you are a licensee, regardless of if you're a processor or a retailer, I am really interested to hear your experience. If you have had enforcement come by, what that experience has been like. I've been hearing that if enforcement is showing up, it's very much an education experience. And I'm just really, the more information I get from you guys in terms of what you're experiencing on the ground level, the better it is for me when I go talk to them about, you know, what's working, what's not working. That's really shaky. But from what I hear, there's not a whole lot of enforcement happening. So that's interesting. A couple things happened at the tail end of last week. There was the court case. And then there was also the findings by the CDC that it looks like vitamin E acetate is, you know, showing up in all these samples, right? And so the question that I had of the state recently is, where does that leave us in terms of the rule, the emergency rule that came down around banning flavors, and what does that mean for the upcoming legislative session? Because we knew that there was going to be legislative action on this topic. I'm still trying to get all of the details around this. It's kind of unfolding minute by minute as it has been since the beginning. But my current understanding is that the governor is very interested in governor legislation. It's either going to be directly from the governor or it'll be sent through to two agencies for agency request legislation. And it's going to be two different pieces of legislation, one for nicotine and one for cannabis. So they're not going to be married together. It's going to be two separate things. Department of Health is going to be dealing with the nicotine, and Liquor and Cannabis Board with cannabis. It is, again, just my understanding. I do not have, like, this is absolute, so don't take it as absolute statements of fact. But it is my understanding that this legislation will also be around flavor, and it is not talking about additives. You might have a lot of feelings around that. If you have feelings around that, please let me know. Because, you know, as we have these conversations with all these different entities, we want to make sure that we're representing the full conversation. And the only way we know what that is if you communicate with us. So please let us know what your experience has been, what your thoughts are, what you would like to see in legislation. All of that stuff helps us when we have those conversations. Do people have questions? I know most of that is extraordinarily vague, and I'm sorry. Are you able to see chat? Okay, no questions online? Okay. Okay, so with no questions on that, Gregory, I'm sorry, I did not give you a heads up, but if you are ready to talk about traceability, let's go to you. Let me know if you're ready.
Sure, how is everybody doing today?
Good, thanks, Gregory. Hold on one second. Yep, I think we're good. Go ahead.
All right. So hello, everyone. I'm Gregory Foster with Cannabis Observer, and I sit on the Traceability Advisory Committee on behalf of the Alliance, and also now on the external work group. I'm calling the Traceability 2.0 external work group. And so just giving you an update on traceability. 3 things today that we can talk about. Just a quick update on the contract status. Talk about the last external work group meeting on November 4th, and then kind of my efforts to help organize something of an informal subcommittee around the question of these global identifiers. So go ahead and jump into it. Contract status. Thankfully, not a lot has changed, but the end of the current amendment's coming up at the end of this month. And my dog is announcing that my wife and daughter are riding home. So bear with us through that. Now, the agency has indicated that they don't really want to sign another boilerplate 2-month extension. So they're currently in negotiations with MJ Freeway, and we'll see what comes out of that. I also wanted to note that the agency, I was on the integrator work session call this morning, and they indicated that they actually are considering another release to fix some issues around what's called the licensing file that has been causing issues for the last several months. So stay tuned on that one. Hopefully that, man, it's another release, even if it is just a bug fix. So we shall see how that all shapes up. Let's go ahead and move on to the external work group. Hey, Bubs. So the Traceability 2.0 external work group, this one was stood up in large part due to our advocacy, but as well the agency's experience with MJ Freeway. And the group has met twice now, most recently on November 4th. So at this meeting, most recently, we walked through a workflow just to kind of have a frame to explore some of the questions and discussions that the agency is wanting to have with the 15 or so work group members to vet some of their understanding and ideas about how we could do this all a little bit differently. So that was interesting. Walk through a workflow from initial part of production all the way through retail sale, really kind of focusing on the workflow around just usable flower, and had a few different discussions that were worth noting. The agency has agreed that they don't want to track from the seed or clone phase, but rather at the level of groups of plants at harvest. And so there was a interesting discussion about groups of plants as distinguished from lots, as distinguished from batches, etc. So got a few different perspectives on the table there for the agency to consider. Went through the process of harvest. There was a good discussion about the usefulness or not of the wet weight measurements and how that impacts workflows for producers, and what kind of indicators of inversion or diversion that the agency was actually gleaning from the data, and whether it's even a particularly useful tool for the agency. So then also walk through distribution and transfer process with a focus on manifests and the information that the agency is requiring to be on those. And again, throughout this whole thing in general, it's nice to see that the agency is sort of walking back the information that it needs as compared to what it would consider nice to have. And so we're whittling all of that down to where it's just the information the agency feels like it needs to meet its regulatory obligations. And then went all the way through to the retail process. And there was some discussion around how much information the agency actually needs to track sales to medical patients. Another piece of that discussion, and kind of moving into the third thing to talk about here today, the agency still is not really sure how to handle globally unique identifiers. So the long identifiers that are on objects as they move throughout the supply chain. And so in that work group meeting, the agency sort of indicated kind of a mixed feeling about whether they wanted to be responsible for provisioning those identifiers, again, still being in the middle of everyone's business. And so provided some pushback on that, and actually followed up with the deputy director to say that I wanted to try and organize some other perspectives on that. And so this morning at the work session, I went ahead and asked for volunteers to set up kind of an informal subcommittee of this work group to offer some recommendations about these globally unique identifiers and address any of the concerns the state might have about them, and eventually just like recommend some algorithms that this is a solved problem from a technical perspective. So hopefully that recommendation will then be presented to this work group when it meets again on December 9th. And maybe we can kind of once and for all move past this question of the global identifiers. So that's what I've got for you today. If I could just take a quick moment to say, would really appreciate thank you to everyone who's already supporting Cannabis Observer. Without your support and help, we couldn't do the work that we're doing. And in fact, we're kind of looking at it now from the standpoint of, if we don't get additional support towards the end of the month, like I'm gonna have to do some other stuff, do something different. So please, if you have if you do find value in the work we do, want us to keep on doing it, please go ahead and contribute to sponsorship or spread the word. There's there's a funding and support page on our website that you can get to at cannabis.observer that lists all the different ways that you can lend a hand. And this is certainly something that I do out of love for the plant and from the community. But at the end of the day, I gotta recognize that I've put a lot of my family's assets into this work, and we're just not gonna be able to put food on the table after a little while if I don't do something possibly different. So anyways, thank you again. Any questions that folks have about all this stuff, happy to answer.
Are there any questions in the room about traceability and what's going on right now with the conversation? Any questions online? Okay, well, we'll keep you informed, and thank you, Gregory.
Thank you.
I know I say this every time, but Cannabis Observer is such an invaluable resource. If you are not contributing, please do. I mean, it's just the access to the meetings, the recordings, the information that we get because they are there. It really helps us do our work better. It helps us stay informed as an industry. And so yes, please support Cannabis Observer. Thanks again, Gregory. All right, so I'm gonna go into, I'm gonna be pretty rapid with this stuff, but I'm gonna go into a lot of the rulemaking that's going on. So I don't know if we can screen share. I'm gonna help Trey here for a second. It is her, there's just the website. Just go right here. And then if you can go to her. Yes, perfect. Okay, and then screen share that for folks. So in, excuse me, in the back you saw there's this little infographic that we put together. I know I talk a lot about the rulemaking process and the steps that we go through, but I just think it's really important you know very, very clearly how it works and when your voice is the most valuable and when you have the most impact. So when it says when a law is passed or a rule is being updated or changed, a CR 101 is filed. Okay, so we've heard that term, CR 101. Whoa, that was too many ones. But it gets filed, and there's not a ton that's actually written. There's not a whole lot of language that has been written at that point. It's basically giving us the scope of what the rulemaking is going to be. And so at that time, you have the ability to comment freely in every way you want on that topic within that scope. So it's a really, really powerful time to say, I think all these things around this topic and give it to them. Because especially with the new rules coordinator at the LCB, she really does take all that information and she starts putting them into spreadsheets and she starts seeing where there are themes, and it really helps her as she's developing an actual draft. So a written draft of the rules that either are going to be brand new or updated or whatever they are. Once they've gotten to a point at which it's a good draft, which feels like there's a lot of information there, a lot of that is going to be pretty solidified by the time a CR 102 is filed. The CR 102 is filed with actual draft language. So we're sitting in CR 102 right now with a couple of things. The packaging and labeling, right? We've been talking a lot about that. That CR 102 is actually filed, so now we have draft language that is doing a bunch of things, and most of it, I have to say, is really good. We fought really hard for a lot of things that are happening with packaging and labeling, not least of which are the waste changes around packaging, right? The reduction in thickness of the bags from 4 milliliters to 2, and the removal of the mandatory dosing caps. The waste that we'll save is pretty intense. So we're super thrilled that those got in. And it's also going to rescind completely those board interim policies on color limitations and all that crazy nonsense that was going on with edibles. That's gone with this newest draft. So these are really, really good things. There have been a couple of people that have pointed out some little minor things that I actually think are pretty minor. So there's lots were brought in at one point, and then serving size recommendations on a couple things like flour and concentrates, which doesn't really make sense. And I honestly think a lot of those are kind of typos because of the way that that rule set was completely reorganized. She broke it out into different sections, and I think there might have just been a little bit of carryover. And so those are not substantial changes. And I bring that up very specifically because if they're not deemed substantial changes, they can still be changed and we can still keep moving forward on our timeline of rulemaking. So again, we're in CR 102 and it opens up this public comment period, which we are in right now. So you look at actual draft language and you're looking at the rules and think about them. Like, is this going to work? Are there things you have questions around? Do you see changes that need to be made? Again, if they're not substantial, after that time period, there is a public hearing. If you can't make it to the public hearing, you still can submit written comments. And then depending, then if nothing massive happens, no substantial changes, the draft is rewritten in the process. Oh, I'm sorry, they are adopted and it moves into CR 103, and then about 30 days later, they become effective. So again, with the packaging and labeling, if we stay on track, and these changes that I think are just, they're not very big changes, ideally, we're still on track to have these adopted by end of year. So that's good, right? There's gonna be some timeline things that are we always have to think about what for businesses in terms of making some of these changes and what is now the what I have to be paying attention to, and we'll address all those things. But I want to make sure that you know that you still have time to comment right now, and you actually have rules that are written out that you can look at and comment on. So if you don't know how to find those, if you don't know where they are, you don't know how to read them, that's why we're here, to help you through those things. So please let me know if you have questions. The other CR 102 that we're sitting in right now is, and it just got filed yesterday, I believe, are the penalties. So penalties have been completely restructured. This work got started during session because of the bill that got passed, 5318, to completely redo enforcement in terms of how they look at things. And so that opened up a couple different rule packages, one of them being penalties. So that's been completely revised. It's been a lot of work. There have been 2 listen and learns on this and not very many comments. So hopefully all that work means that we got pretty good to, like, this works. This is a lot better. So a lot of energy and effort into making this better for the industry. Do we have a question? I'm sorry, what?
Gregory posted.
Oh yeah, so Gregory's so great. He has the packaging and labeling link, and then the penalties, and he has them with the markup so you can see what's being changed. Thanks as always, Gregory. So I mentioned that bill 5318 that passed opened up several different rulemaking packages, one of them being penalties. The other one is true parties of interest. And so there's also been quite a few meetings happening around true parties of interest, which is a very complex topic. And really the complexity comes into play with control, the word control. What is control? How do you define control? Who has control? How do you know when somebody has control or doesn't have control? Like, these are very complex topics. And again, we're trying to find a way where if it's been defined as X, then it's enforceable, right? We like rules that are actually enforceable and not rules that are just made up to make ourselves feel better. So that work is going on, and I think it's been taking longer than intended because it is kind of a complex topic, but the conversation is ongoing. This is all to say that there hasn't been a CR 102 on TPI yet, right? Because we're still working through it. So there's a lot of opportunity to comment right now and to give the LCB your feedback as to what that means to you. The other one, and a meeting was just held this week around it, a work group, is the voluntary consultation program. That was a big part of that bill, was allowing the industry to be able to reach out to the LCB and say, I want a meeting, I want you to come into my facility or my retail store or whatever it is, and I want you to tell me if I am compliant, without fear that you are going to get written up for a violation. And so that was a big part of that bill, is having that access to knowing if you're fully compliant. Like, you're trying to be compliant, but maybe you overlooked something. This is establishing that program. The first meeting again happened on Tuesday. And the biggest piece, the biggest takeaway with that is that while the bill is being written, while we've been having all these conversations, the number one point that we are just honing in on is this can never be used as an enforcement tool. This is consulting, this is education, this is not enforcement. And so when the rules are being written, we're being very clear, like, what is the purpose of this and how it's intended to be used. So just so you know, that conversation is going on with that. Questions? Yes.
Those 2
So the compliance program and the.
And this is right. So, I've got this promise program that was signed 2 months ago. I want to know if they're in compliance with this. And then for those,
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know if that's been brought up, actually. I think that's a valid question, and I would ask that maybe you forward that to me so I can bring it up in those conversations to see where.
it's like a big part of the compliance program.
Yeah.
What if the offense has already been done?
Right.
And do it?
Well, there is also something in the rules, and this is where it gets complicated. And I apologize, because while we were doing the legislation, I was very vested in all of this, so it was really easy to pull up. But in terms of how the enforcement kicks out. So if you're in violation of a certain level of something and it's your first time and it's not in this particular category of being egregious, like you're not trying to really hide some bad activity, then there are options for you within that. If you start to stack that same kind of violation on in a certain time period, well, then you're up for license cancellation. So that's a lot of what that law was around, and then how the rules lay into that law. So there's things to figure out depending on what the violation is and the severity of it. And that's all kind of laid out in the penalty grid. So you might want to look there too. Other questions? Oh, yes. There's also right now with the true party of interest conversation, we put out a survey asking about bonuses and commissions, and if you use them, how you use them. That information is really important for this true party of interest conversation that we're having. So if you haven't taken that survey, it came out in our newsletter. It's at the very top. The link is also there. Please take it. It's helpful information as we go into these meetings to know what is actually happening in your businesses, so we can advocate appropriately. So if there are not other questions around that, I'm not seeing any, I'm going to ask Nick to come up, and he's going to be giving an update on two things: the task force, the ecology task force, and the potency tax report. Board member Nick Mosley. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Nick Mosley. I'm with Confidence Analytics and a board member with the Alliance. I'm going to try to give you a quick sort of just high-level overview of, as Laura mentioned, two topics: the Cannabis Science Task Force and the Taxation by Potency work group. So just as a brief reminder, for the Cannabis Science Task Force, this was enacted by the legislature. The 2019 legislature put forth a $1.6 million four-year program to overhaul the accreditation standards for laboratories. These are the certification standards for how cannabis laboratories get certified. Basically, it's broken down into two work groups: an analytical work group and a proficiency testing work group, with a steering committee that oversees both of those work groups and votes on items that come out of those work groups. I'm a member of the steering committee. Also on the steering committee are members of the WSDA, the Department of Ecology, the Department of Health, and the Liquor and Cannabis Board. Again, it's a four-year plan where two reports to the legislature are the work products of the task force. The first report to the legislature is scoped as pesticides in plants. Okay, so that is the scope of work for our first report, which is due to the legislature, I believe, by midsummer, and we're well underway. And just as a broad overview, essentially what's happening here, and this is largely driven by the Department of Agriculture, their recommendation is that the cannabis labs are to be held, at least when they're testing flower and concentrate, are to be held to the same accreditation standards roughly as USDA accredited laboratories. So that's the direction that this appears to be going. We're essentially taking federal regulations for USDA laboratories and replacing, essentially copy-paste, replace the word USDA with LCB and replace agricultural commodity with cannabis commodity. Again, this is for pesticides in plants in this report, but we can anticipate the same sort of work to sort of move into the second report, which is to consider potency, heavy metals, other products, and anything else, which should be the second report, which should be due to legislature, I believe, December of 2021. All of this is to end in a new accreditation program to be driven by the Department of Ecology. Now I mentioned USDA testing rules. That applies to cannabis flower and cannabis concentrates, which are considered agricultural commodities. But when it comes to infused products, like your edibles, your oils, tinctures, beverages, these are not agricultural commodities. They are mixed commodities, where multiple commodities have been mixed. And the anticipation is that the rules for testing those types of products are going to fall more in line with FDA requirements. So that's a pretty broad overview. If you'd like to get more into the nuts and bolts, I really encourage you to join. The Cannabis Alliance has a Google group, TCA committees. Definitely encourage you to take a look there, where I am posting, all of the nitty gritty about it. But if there are questions here right now, I'd be happy to take them. Seeing none. Okay, so the other topic I was going to cover, this also was enacted by the legislature, by the 2019 legislature. It's tax by potency. It was pretty vague. And essentially, I'll just read it to you. $100,000 of the dedicated marijuana account for the fiscal year 2020 was provided solely for the Liquor and Cannabis Board to convene a work group to determine the feasibility, and that's an important word here, the feasibility of and make recommendations for varying the marijuana excise tax rate based on product potency. The work group must submit a report of its findings to the committees of the legislature by December 1st, 2019. So that's coming up. So I was part of that work group. We convened a number of times, and there were members of LCB, DOH, prevention community. There were folks from University of Washington, as well as members of the Alliance and other industry groups. Essentially, the conclusion that we came to was that while the idea of varying product tax by potency may have some merit, especially on the idea we're trying to prevent addictive behavior, we decided it was not feasible at this time, right? That was what the work group was asked to do, is would it be feasible? And we determined that it was not feasible at this time. The work group determined that first we would need to develop a more robust and trustworthy traceability system, as well as more standardized cannabis testing, along with further research on the impact of price on habit-forming behavior before considering changes to the taxation policy in ways that would rely on potency measures. BOTEC was contracted to do some work towards this work group, and to quote their report, they said, "At present, any change in the tax structure would require the industry to embrace large known costs, as well as additional unknown costs in exchange for unknown benefits." So our recommendation to the legislature is that it is not feasible at this time. Any questions? Yeah, in the back. Well, yeah, okay, so I'll repeat the question. The question is basically, is there anything else we can point to where there would be tiers of taxation based on some product ingredient concentration? And the answer is yes, there are actually multiple that we could point to, and alcohol is one of them. Alcohol does have a tiered taxation based on concentration of alcohol. Lower concentrations do experience lower taxes. I think it varies by state, but generally I think that's why you get like Bacardi sells at 151, because Bacardi 152 would be taxed at a higher rate. Additionally, I believe it is Ohio, in their recreational cannabis laws, they do have, it's either Ohio or Iowa, one of those big central states. They do have a tiered taxation based on potency. And the work group discussed that at length, and sort of concluded that they had the advantage of putting their recreational regulated system in place with that in mind, whereas for us it would mean overhauling our taxation mechanism, and so that was one of the arguments for not. Yeah, AC.
Question: is this for lifestyle and not medical?
So that was discussed as well. So the question is, was this just about lifestyle or recreational, or would it also impact medical? And that was discussed. Definitely, BOTEC sort of wrote out some scenarios where, maybe based on the THC CBD ratio, you could make a case that higher CBD products are more medical and therefore should be taxed at a lower rate. It definitely was discussed, but the legislature didn't ask us to specifically address that question.
So my other question is that obviously it's another prohibition on THC.
Mm-hmm.
So is this also applying to THCA?
Yeah. So the question is, would it also apply to THCA? So the legislature, again, you know, in what they asked the work group to do was the feasibility of the tax rate based on potency. So we had to sort of sit down first and ask, what does potency mean? And the folks from the University of Washington were actually quite adamant that THC is certainly not the only constituent that contributes to potency, right? CBD may have antagonistic effects as well as Delta 8, Delta 11. They may have even higher potency than THC, which again just got to this question of, is it even feasible to tax based on potency, given that THC is probably not the only constituent we would be concerned about. Any other questions? Again, if you want to get more into the nitty gritty, I do post everything on CCA Committee's Google group. Thanks.
Okay, and as per usual, Gregory did a great job of adding those links for anybody who wants to follow them. So just a couple more things, because we have a couple of presenters today. I'm going to just sort of run through this pretty quickly again. That Google group that we use is a great resource for having conversations, or at least getting information and following up with me, you know, personally, if you're not comfortable posting online. But it is also a great way to bounce ideas off of other members. So if you're a member and you're not utilizing that, please do, and ask us if you don't know what we're talking about. So a couple other legislative stuff. So as some of you may recall, there were a couple of pieces of LCB agency request legislation that they floated out a little while ago. They didn't give us a whole heck of a lot of time to comment, to review and comment before they had a deadline to submit it to the governor. So just because it is agency request legislation doesn't mean that it's an automatic done deal. They're gonna float it during the session. What that means is that it's something that they're interested in. They have to take it to the governor's office and have it approved for it to be agency request legislation. So just so you know, but they had a deadline to get it to the governor's office, and they wanted our comments, and they didn't give us a whole heck of a lot of time. And as I recall, it was over a holiday weekend. But we figured it out, we got it together, we worked hard, and we gave our comments that we were not pleased with either piece of agency request legislation. Both of them are deeply flawed. One of them is about social equity, and then the other one was a whole cluster of stuff around supposedly helping small craft growers, but also helping medical patients, adding in delivery, on-site sale. I mean, it's a whole bunch of a lot of stuff. Very complex. Each of those topics is a very complex issue, and trying to put them all into one was problematic at best. So since then, I have not heard much about that last one, the multiple issue bill that I just brought up, but they did do some revisions to the social equity bill. And Gregory was really great. I'm going to just keep, singing his praises. He's really great because he went through and he kind of narrowed it down to the two, kind of the main things that he saw as being different. So the first bill had this program available to a pretty wide swath of folks. So it was people of color and veterans and women. It was basically looking at a definition in statute that is pretty broad for this group of folks that might have access to this. The new bill says that they may give priority to these applicants that represent veterans and women, but they must give priority to those applicants who represent communities of color. So that's a change. And then it doesn't allow local governments to block consideration of applications. So there's that. We have been working, the Cannabis Alliance has been working with another organization called the Black Cannabis Commission that we forwarded them this because it directly impacts who they represent, looking for feedback. My initial response from that group was that no, this doesn't work either. This is a little bit of a slap in the face in terms of all that needs to occur when it comes to social equity, and so this bill is also continues to be flawed. But that conversation again, is happening not only on our Google group, but with that group. So if you're interested in these topics, if you want to look at that bill and give your thoughts on it, I mean, we want to hear what you think. How to make it better if you think that there's some valid points in it, or if it's just not worth it. These are important things for us to know. The other thing I was going to say is, as I said, these bills need to still get approved by the governor's office for them to even, be in the legislative session next session. They have not been approved as of yet. So, and they may not be, who knows? But that's what's out there in terms of what the LCB is doing legislatively. There's also, a lot of, we're hearing lots of things about different things that people are wanting to do. Obviously, there's the out-of-state ownership that's probably going to pop up again this year. So we really need to know from our membership how you feel about that. It is not our issue, but it will come up. There's also going to be Home Grow again, which this organization supports. There has been talk around delivery, although the conversation there, I'm not sure where it stands. That may be off the table for this year. I don't know, but we'll be keeping track. And then for us, our top two pieces of legislation that we're working on, again, we started them last year, is the Cannabis Commission and removing the excise tax for patients. So that's what we're working on. But because the legislative session is going to be short, and even when it's not short, it is a flurry of activity and things happen very quickly. Bills get dropped, like 30 bills in one day can get dropped on cannabis. And we as an organization want to represent you, the membership, as best as possible when this stuff happens. We are going to be coordinating a new committee. It's going to be our Legislative Oversight Committee. So if you're a member, I will be sending out a link to an application that you can fill out if you're interested in sitting on this Legislative Oversight Committee. We are going to have pretty specific things that we're looking for with the people that sit on that committee. One of which is for you not to just represent your own view, right? We are a very, very diverse membership base. The values of this organization is that we look at how pieces of policy affect every part of the industry. And so when we're looking at these pieces of legislation and we're thinking about how we want to position ourselves on a different piece of legislation, we want to keep that totality of the industry in mind and not just think about our own business interests, right? So we're going to be looking for people who can think about what they have experienced, but also think about how that might impact others. So just keep that in mind as you're filling out the application. The other thing is it comes very quickly. So sometimes we need the committee to be able to respond fast. And the idea of the committee is twofold: to get the membership involved and helping to advise the board and the organization what positions to take, giving you access to that. It is your organization. And then the other piece is really helping the board, right? There's a lot that comes down and they want to hear from the membership as to how you feel. So this Legislative Oversight Committee is kind of like a focus group of members to give the board that insight and to give them suggestions on how we think the organization should go. Okay? Any questions around that? Doug?
I have a comment and a question. As far as the LCB going to the governor's office to get approval, one step that you didn't mention is once they get that approval, they actually do have to go to legislators and find a sponsor for their bill.
Sure.
And I'm sure that there's some kind of internal thing between the governor and legislators where it's pretty much a done deal, but I have been aware where in the past they've gone and looked for sponsors and
Couldn't find them.
without them.
Yeah.
The second thing is that with the short session of 60 days, has the Alliance already scheduled the
Lobby day?
legislative day of action? And of course, keeping that in mind, that the sooner that is in the session, the more effective it is. And the sooner we do outreach for appointments for that day, the better.
Okay, so for those online, I'm not sure if you've heard, but Don wanted to make sure that we know that even if the governor approves the LCB request legislation, that they still have to go and find sponsors, just like any other bill. And the second question was around our lobby day that we do every year. Yes, we will be doing one. We are currently trying to find the most ideal date. As soon as we have that date, we will let you know so that you can sign up and participate in that. We'll set up, as we do, your meetings. We'll put you into groups. For those that have attended, I think you agree it's pretty awesome. It's a great way to get familiar with the legislative process, going down to Olympia, meeting with your legislators. What does it take you have like 15 minutes if you're lucky. How are you going to talk with them and make sure your point resonates? We help you with all that training. We set up the meetings. It's really effective. Last year, I think we doubled the number of attendees from the year before. So let's do it again. Let's double from there. And we always take a nice picture on the Capitol steps. So we will be letting people know, definitely, as soon as that date is scheduled. We're actively looking. Again, nice links. So if there's nothing else, I really want to start handing it over to our presenters. Do people have any other questions about anything that they've heard thus far? No. Okay. Well, so I would like to please invite up Nick Jikomas of Leafly. Leafly is our newest foundational member of the Cannabis Alliance. We're very excited to have them. And I'm going to let Nick just run with it. If you just got to make sure you're just centered.
You ready? Cool. Yes. Yep, from the beginning. Let me click through. Can I click through? Yeah, if you don't mind, just hit this. Something my little. Okay. It's very big file. Yeah. Thank you guys for having us. Happy to be here. I'm going to go through a lot of slides very quickly. So I kind of apologize for that ahead of time. But I was here a couple of years ago, I think almost 2 years ago now, and I just pasted some slides from that presentation in here. And the basic idea at the time was we were looking at chemotyping data. So we're looking at cannabinoid and terpene profiles for legal cannabis products. And the idea was, well, this is how we normally think about strains at Leafly and elsewhere, right? There's three kinds. There's purple ones and they make you sleepy, and there's red ones and they make you excited. And there's green ones in the middle, and that's how it works. But when you look at the actual chemistry, you start to get a different picture, where if you actually look at the cannabinoid and terpene profiles across these products, you can actually segregate the strains and the products into distinct groups based on their chemical composition. But when you do that, you notice that the categories that we normally think about don't really map very well onto those new groups. So that was a couple years ago, and probably every 6 or 8 months, Danielle would send me an email and ask me what we were doing. And I never really had a good answer. But what we were doing was we were going around, and we've been working with some testing facilities across North America for a couple of different reasons. One, if you actually want to build consumer-facing applications for this stuff, you need data to actually power that. And two, you actually need to work with many labs in different regions because there's, it's like little bubbles. Because the market's so fractionated. So you need data from every region that consumers are actually in. And as you guys know, in Washington and elsewhere, if you actually want the data to be accurate and consistent across groups, you can't just go knock on everyone's door and work with all of the labs that are out there. And so we've been going around, and we've actually been looking at dozens of labs at this point, and they actually share anonymized data samples with us. And then the data science team evaluates those samples, and then actually in a majority of cases, we choose not to work with the labs that are out there. And so I'll give you an idea for some of the things that we see. So this is 9 labs throughout the continent. And what you're just seeing here is the average total THC that you would measure in the THC dominant flower samples from that lab. And you notice that the horizontal lines in the middle, that's the median level of THC. So it varies from around 15% to around 24%. So it's a big difference. But the thing that you notice too is like the shape of each of those violins, we call them, is very different. So sometimes you get, if you turn your head to the side, it's like looking at a bell curve. It's showing you the distribution of samples. So you would expect most of the samples to be somewhere in the middle, right? There's a middle range. Like if you were to measure everyone's height, most people would be in the middle. Some people would be really tall, some people would be really short. And then you notice some interesting ones. So like notice that one on the far left, more than 50% of their samples are testing above 25%. That's interesting. The one that you guys would know, I think, from this group is Peak Analytics. So that was that lab from Washington. So that's where they sit there. If you inspect the data closely, you see that once you get to the 20% mark, they see a nice increase in the samples they were testing. But this just kind of gives you an example of the diversity of the results you see from labs that are out there. And so that's basically the idea behind our Leafly Certified Labs program, which is if you're a lab and you want to submit anonymized data samples to us, we're actually going to evaluate the outcomes of the lab. So all of these labs are state certified. All of the ones that have been caught falsifying data, they're all state certified, and they all check all of those boxes. But no one's really actually looking very much, no regulators at least, are looking very much at the outcomes the labs are producing. There's been individuals who have done that. We've done that. Jim's done that. But the people actually writing the rules aren't doing that. And so that's what we're looking at. And so, long story short, now we've taken data from those labs, and we're taking in all those cannabinoid and terpene data sets, and then we're going to use that to build a new way to show consumers about the chemical differences between strains. And that's what took us a year and a half, because it's kind of hard. So I have to skip over all the details, but we're going to be using shapes to convey information about cannabinoids, and we're going to be using colors to convey information about terpenes. So every cannabinoid, or all the major ones, most of the major ones, they get a shape. So THC is a diamond. Whenever you see a diamond, that means something about THC levels. CBD is very different from THC, right, in terms of what it does. So it gets a circle, a very different kind of shape, and so on and so forth. And then there are the terpenes as well. And some of you guys probably know about these. Most consumers don't really know very much about them. So we can think about them in terms of their name, or we can think about them in terms of their aroma, or in this case, color as well. But anyways, we put all of those together. And what I forgot to do before I got started, I apologize, is I'm going to open up a web browser. So so we put those two things together to represent the chemical composition of strains and products. So what does that look like? Well, the best way to understand how it works is to just build one yourself. So what you can do now on Leafly, so I'm going to go to Leafly. And so we made some changes last month, and this is just the beginning. So I'm of age, so I can go on. I'm going to go into this thing called the strain finder, or the strain generator. And so what we actually built was a software system that will actually take that data, those cannabinoid and terpene measurements, and it'll automatically generate a profile for any strain or any product that we have lab data for. And we're not going to do this. And this is how it works. So this is the consumer-facing portion of this. And so you can see that when I take the THC dial here, the shape changes, right? So more THC gives you longer diamonds. I take it down, I get shorter diamonds. If I add CBD in there, we're talking about circles. The size of the circle indicates something about the CBD levels. There are other cannabinoids, and we'll build in that functionality as time goes on. But you can play with this, and you can start playing around with terpene profiles. This is one of my favorite ones. So the orange one. And then we can show you similar strains nearby that are likely to have that kind of chemical profile for that strain. And you can go in and you can learn about that on Leafly, so I'm not going to dwell on this too much.
Great.
But one of the things, thank you.
So exciting.
One of the things that we'll talk about too is, we can talk about golden pineapple, and this is the most common profile associated with that strain name, which people choose to give to products. That would probably be an accurate way of saying it. But of course, not everyone's growing the same thing. So we'll come to that. So that's how the shapes and the colors come together to represent a strain. So let's look at some strains. So why did we want to do this? Well, sort of a Well, really what we want to do at Leafly is we want to be able to, I mean, at the end of the day, we're an education platform that helps consumers, if they want to, find the right cannabis for them. And what that has to mean functionally for us as a business is we have to be really good at giving personalized recommendations to people. So if you think about Netflix, I don't need to poll the audience, probably 80% of people in here have a Netflix account. And every time you log into Netflix, when you log in and I log in, we don't actually see the same experience, right? Because they've tuned that experience to the movies you like to watch, and they're probably not the same ones that I like to watch. And cannabis is very similar because the strains can be very different in terms of their composition and potential effects, but also the people are very different, right? So even if you consume the same product at the same dose, you're not going to get the same effect from one person to the other because, right, everyone's body's different. That's basically the long and short of it. And so we've got Blue Dream, Gelato, Dutch Treat, and AC/DC here. And you may or may not remember what all the colors meant. That's okay for now. But the point is they're different, right? You can look at these and you can see that they're 4 different things made out of 4 different sets of stuff, or different ratios of stuff, at least. And the reason that's important, and what most consumers probably don't understand yet, is, well, they're all hybrids. They're all considered hybrids by most people most of the time, as are about 2/3 of the flower products that you're going to buy on a legal shelf anywhere on the planet. And yet they can be incredibly diverse, right? And so one of the other questions was, okay, well, there's diversity among the hybrids. You knew that was going to be true. Well, how different are indicas and sativas really? So let's just average all the data from all of the indica samples and all the hybrid samples, all the sativa samples, and let's see what that flower looks like. So these are 4 different strains. They're all hybrids. So what do the indicas, the sativas, and the hybrids look like? We'll look at that next. You can pull out the center of each of these shapes, and you just get one shape and one color to make it even more simple, especially for people who are newer to cannabis. Right. So that's going to tell you the most abundant cannabinoid and the most abundant terpene in that strain or that product. But how different are these really? Any guesses? They're not that different on average. So they're all pointy because, 80–85% of all the strains that are out there are THC dominant. Doesn't matter if they're indica sativa or hybrid. If you go onto the internet and you look up the difference between indica sativa hybrid, you can find websites that'll say sativas make you energized because they've got more THC. And then you can find other websites that say the indicas make you sleepy because they have more THC. They don't. And they're all blue because myrcene is the most abundant terpene in cannabis, and it doesn't matter which kind. You can go onto the internet again. You can find websites that say indicas make you sleepy because they have more myrcene. They don't, at least not as they're labeled in the commercial marketplace. And that doesn't mean there aren't differences between some of the things that are called sativas out there. And there's some interesting little pockets. But on average, you don't really see a difference. But we just saw that there's a lot of diversity, and this is actually kind of a representative snapshot of the actual diversity in the terpene profiles that are out there. And there's a lot going on. Probably many of you haven't seen these yet, so it's kind of hard to see what's going on here. But part of the point on the education side for us, and part of our job, is that even though there's like 3,000 strain pages on Leafly, and there's allegedly 3,000 different strains out there aren't. There's a lot going on here, right? There's a lot going on. It doesn't matter how you count it in particular, but if you just rearrange the strains in the right way, they move in a cool way, but it skipped over it. You can actually see that there's actually some pretty simple patterns out there, right? There's not that many colors. The primary colors out there, there's actually just a few. There's a lot of blue ones, right? Because myrcene's the most common terpene. So about 40% of products in Washington are going to be myrcene dominant, at least for flower. Right behind that would be the fuchsia ones on the bottom. That's caryophyllene, right? That's my and then yellow, solid amount of yellow, solid amount of limonene, not quite as much. The orange one's less common. Only about 1 in 10 strains are terpinolene dominant. So those are the orange ones. Those are interesting ones for different reasons. There's only one green one up there at the top. Much harder to find a pinene dominant strain. The ones with the circles on the top left, there's many fewer of them, and they're all blue. That's kind of interesting. So there's less diversity there. And basically, if you look at all of the strains, we could look at hundreds of those, but there's really just a few basic types of strains out there. That's kind of the point. So if you were to randomly pick a strain off of a shelf, 98–99% of the time, it's going to pretty much look like one of these. So most of the time, it's going to be THC dominant, right? Those are the ones on the top, and it's going to have one of those types of terpene profiles, right? Myrcene, pinene, caryophyllene, limonene, terpinolene. Every once in a while, you'll see another one, but they're super rare. And it's really hard for a consumer to find those ones. And that's part of what we can help with. The CBD strains, there's many fewer of them, and they're less diverse, just because people have not been spending the last 3 decades trying to make the dankest hemp strains they can make. So there's a lot of room for innovation there. half of the CBD strains are myrcene dominant. And occasionally you get something else, but not very much. But what we need to do is we can't just stop at the strain page, right? Because if you go to the Blue Dream page, we like to talk about the Blue Dream page. It's the most popular strain on Leafly of all time. There's like 10,000 reviews or something. But actually, it's actually not very good in some ways, if you think about it. Because when 10,000 people review Blue Dream on Leafly, they're not all reviewing the same product, right? They're reviewing probably hundreds of different things. And some of them are Blue Dream, and some of them are not Blue Dream, and some of them are concentrates, and some of them are flower. And even when it's all flower and it's Blue Dream, it's not every grower is the same, right? So it's really not the same thing that all of those things are pointing to. So we need to build this stuff for individual products and brands, basically. So how do we think about that? We think about it this way. So this is Blue Dream, and then I picked just 6 example growers from Washington to show you representative diversity. So on the left, the big one, that's like the strain page, right? So what we're doing is we're aggregating data, thousands of data points across hundreds of growers, and we're filtering out like the clear outliers. And then we're just basically averaging the results. And then we'll show you like the average, the most common profile associated with Blue Dream, and that's the strain page. And it's blue and green. And if you know about that cultivar, you know that Blue Dream is known to be a high myrcene, high pinene cultivar. And so when you look at all of the individual growers, and I don't know who most of these growers are, I just know it's a grower out there. Most of the time it's blue or green. So about 80–85% of the time, anywhere you look in the United States, or on average in the United States, you're gonna get the myrcene dominant, the blue one, or the pinene dominant, the green one. But then sometimes you get something like this. So what's that one on the bottom right? Well, it's orange, so it's terpinolene dominant. And so what that probably is, so what is it literally? Well, literally, it's a flower product being sold somewhere by someone, and they've attached the name Blue Dream to it. But it's terpinolene dominant, so it's probably not actually Blue Dream. They may or may not be aware that it's not accurately labeled, but that's probably what's going on there. So we can filter that out and then create the composite image, but ultimately we need to actually be showing consumers like what the actual products are out there, so they can start to figure out what product has the best kind of composition for them, right? So if you're going in and you're just picking a random hybrid off a dispensary shelf, or you're going into a dispensary for the first time, right? A bud tender is going to tell you, try whatever, try Girl Scout cookies, it's a popular hybrid. And you go home and you try it and you like it, that's great. So you try another hybrid because they run out of Girl Scout cookies like they do all the time. But that hybrid could be completely different in its composition. Or if you don't like it, you want to know what other kind of cannabis to try. That's the basic idea here. So I know I'm going fast. I'm skipping over a lot of details. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to show you a few example brands from Washington and what their strains actually look like in this format. And we can start to think about the way this can look on Leafly and the way it could actually look in like a physical retail environment, or in a product package or something like that. But one of the people that we've been working with who's been very patient with us as we've been building this is House of Cultivar. So what they're doing is they're working through Confidence Analytics, and then they give them permission to let us identify which data is theirs. And then I can build for each of their strains. I can pull out their actual data and show them their strains like this. And so we're working on some stuff with them to do with this. And this is all of their strains. Press it. It's thinking. It's a big file. And so what you're going to see is a bunch of flowers, and then you're going to notice whatever you notice. And what's fun when we do this with growers is they actually notice things that they couldn't notice before because they couldn't see it in the same way. And so I'm going to restart it. Yeah, we want to work with as many brands as possible, especially in the long term. In the short term, we want to work as many brands as possible, but we're also still like building out and figuring out a lot of the functionality. So we don't have the bandwidth to work with 1,000 brands today. We want to get there in the next year or so. But we are working with a handful of brands in different places, and we want to work with more to help build out what sort of the digital applications of this are, and potentially some physical applications as well. These designs lend themselves nicely to physical applications and some image recognition technology. But the whole idea that we're trying to get at is we want to be able to point customers, when I say customer, I mean an end user on Leafly, so people using the Leafly platform. We want to help them find the right cannabis for them, and we want to help get them to products that they can trust and they can feel safe with. And there's a number of reasons we do that. One, I mean, just that we think it's the right thing to do. Two, when we segregate the strains based on their composition, we think it's going to allow us to be much more precise about recommendations. And three, you know, you can think about things like the vaping crisis and all of that stuff that's going on. People are going to become more and more concerned over time with the composition and the safety of their products, and they're going to want to be pointed to products that they can really trust. And two, you know, consumers are smart, or they're going to get smarter over time as they become more and more educated. They're going to become more and more discerning about the types of products they want to consume. So, can I get a little help? Yeah. I don't know where it went. I had to restart the PowerPoint program. Okay. So I think we have to reopen. So anyways, I'll show you a few brands from Washington and what their strains look like. And I picked some strains that I thought had interesting features. Yeah, I can start it from here. So I'm not sure. Start right here. Okay. Okay, cool. So they should be able to see. Can we close out some other programs maybe? Okay, thank you. Yes, we can run this current slide. Yeah. So I'm not sure it's going to work. Sorry, I had a slide just for you.
They're not harvested yet.
What's that?
They're not harvested yet. That's why they're not ready.
Oh, there it goes. Maybe. Yeah, current slide. Current slide. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, maybe this will work. I think it's literally just this slow. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so this is House of Cultivar. So you see what, you know, there's quite a bit of blue, quite a bit of yellow. And what we do is you can sort of look at the strains in a couple different ways. So on the next slide, if it goes to the next slide, what you're going to see is we're going to move these so it's indica, hybrid, and sativa, and then we're just going to see what we see. Right. So when we were building this, right, when we were trying to understand all this stuff, one question would be like, oh, indica, sativa, hybrid. Maybe all of the blue ones will be on one side, and maybe all the yellow ones will be on another side, and maybe the orange ones will be in the middle or something like that. Any guesses? They're all THC strains, so they don't really have any CBD strains. We got a couple orange ones. The orange ones also have triangles. The orange ones often have triangles. That's kind of interesting. There's only one green one, Sapphire Cookies. They tell a good story about that one. I don't think it's going to go to the next slide. Oh, there it is. Okay, there we go. So majority of their strains are hybrids. That's true of most growers, right? Because the majority of stuff out there is considered a hybrid. They don't have quite as many sativas as indicas, and you know the colors are basically spread out, right? So we can rearrange it based on the actual profile, which is what the flowers are based on. And so now it's going to segregate by color. And then we'll notice something else. And what we're going to notice is they've got a lot of some things and not a lot of other things. And that's generally going to be true for most growers. So they're only going to have one pinene dominant strain. There's just less of those out there for some reason. I don't know exactly why. There are not as many orange strains. There's not as many terpinolene dominant strains. I think I might know why that is, but that's really interesting because at least on Leafly, we see an outsized amount of user engagement and user interest to those strains. They tend to have certain aromas and certain effects associated with them. But I suspect, so the orange ones are interesting because it's actually a subset of mostly, not entirely, but mostly sativas and sativa dominant hybrids. So anything like Jack Herrera or anything sort of in that family, J1, Blackjack, anything like, anything with golden in the name, golden lemon, golden pineapple, golden goat. Here's our slide. So you can see, right, they've got one green one, they've got two orange ones, a lot of caryophyllene and limonene. Those ones go together, right? So those would be like your cookie strains, your Gorilla Glues, your wedding cakes. Those ones tend to go hand in hand, and a lot of myrcene as well, right? So 9 out of 10 of their products are myrcene or caryophyllene and limonene. And they don't have a lot of the other stuff. And that's interesting to them because it might tell them where they want to start putting some of their growing efforts if they want to create a more diverse product landscape for their customers. They might not want to. Some growers might want to specialize in one type of product. Some growers might want to have different types that maybe get geared towards certain types of audiences. And so now I'm just going to show you some interesting strains for some other brands, just to show you what the possibilities are out there. So this is actually a brand from Canada. I'll show you some Washington ones next, but this one is really interesting. These two are really interesting to me. And the idea is if you have a unique flower like this, it's going to mean you probably have unique effects as well because I have never seen strains like this, and we've looked at hundreds of thousands of samples at this point. The one on the left, that one's interesting because it's diamond in the middle, THC dominant. The triangles are almost as big as the diamonds. So it's got almost as much CBG as it does THC. So it's a balanced strain with THC and CBG at comparable levels. And it's a pinene dominant terpene profile. And that's just like bizarre. I've just never seen anything like that before. So, you can find that in British Columbia. I haven't been able to find it anywhere else yet. I would like to try it. It probably doesn't feel like any weed most of us have smoked before. That one on the right is interesting too. It's THC CBD. That's not that unusual. What's that? That one is called CBG Shiatsu. The one on the right is interesting too. So THC CBD, that part's not that interesting. You can find those. But it's got those dark blue, bluey purpley colors, and that's myrcene and linalool. And you don't tend to see linalool get that high in most strains. And so those are terpenes that are thought, we don't really know that much about the terpenes, but they're thought to have more relaxing effects. So I think that strain would have very interesting qualities, both for a recreational user, but also for a medical patient. And now they can just see it for the first time. So if you put strains like this onto Leafly with a bunch of other strains and you show it to bud tenders or consumers, you always get people in the room that are like, wait, what's that one over there? Like, what's that weird one over there? People want to try the new thing. And so this is a way for people to showcase what they have based on what it's actually made out of. So if you have something that's truly unique, people will see it, right? Anybody can make a new box with a new color and a new logo, but we want to allow consumers to see things that are actually unique and actually different. So these are some examples from Gabriel Cannabis. So these are brands that are all doing the Tested with Confidence program, and they're all giving us permission to look at their data. And when we do that, we can do this. So there's some strains that I just picked. Sunset Sherbet, usually limonene dominant. That's what Gabriel's is. Sometimes it's caryophyllene. That's the number 2 terpene. White Widow, that's sort of your canonical high myrcene pinene strain. So White Widow looks like that. Blue Dream often looks like that. There's a lot of stuff that looks like that. So those are 2 really common profiles. This one on the right, Cookies and Cream, caryophyllene limonene, high THC. That's your cookie strains, gelato, Girl Scout cookies, Gorilla Glue, all that stuff tends to look like that. Theirs has got a little bit of CBG in it. So if you see a shape in there, it means it's at least above 1%. So they've got about 2% CBG in theirs. Let's look at another grower. Puffin Farms is next. So they grow a lot more CBD strains than the average grower. So you've got Remedy in the middle, right? That's their really high CBD strain. This is really like a canonical CBD strain, right? CBD dominant, no diamonds, and that's the terpene profile you're most likely to find. Myrcene, pinene, caryophyllene. Majority of CBD strains look like that. They're kind of boring in that way. Same terpene profile for AC/DC, but that one's balanced. So it's got CBD and THC. So it's sort of like the same product, except you've kicked up the THC somewhat and you kicked down the CBD a little bit. And then that's their Dutch Treat. Dutch Treat's interesting because it's one of those orange ones. It's terpinolene dominant, only 1 out of 10 strains. And look at theirs too. It's THC dominant, but it's got the diamond and the circle. So it's got some CBD and some CBG. That's kind of interesting. Dutch Treat often has a little bit of CBG. I don't usually see both of those in there. If you look at Trailblazers, it's basically the same thing, but a little bit different, right? So they got a little bit more CBD than CBG, but if I go back and forth, right? So look on the left, you can see it's basically the same thing, but just a little bit different. And these things will vary from harvest to harvest a little bit, of course. And then the one in the middle is interesting. So the Pennywise is balanced, but it's got orange on the inner ring. So that means the secondary terpene is terpinolene. You don't see that very much in those strains. So that's kind of unique. Northern Lights has an unusual profile. That's just an unusual profile. Most things don't look like that. I'm gonna go fast. There's actually only one more slide. So there's this Piney Dominant. It's got some CBG. It's got some terpinolene. Most Northern Lights samples out there don't look like that. We can also build strains that don't even exist yet. So these are strains that we just made up. So that would be a THCV dominant strain on the left. That would be a CBC dominant strain on the right. And we can play with the terpene profiles. And so we can start to play around with what it will look like when people start to create flower and oils with new compositions. And yes, the question is we want to work with more brands. We want to start bringing this to life for consumers on Leafly and offline in the retail environment. We're building that out right now. It's going to take time to really build it out. But that's what we're doing. So yeah. So if anyone has questions, I don't know if we're going to do questions right now or if we should just wait. Jim, yeah.
Nice work.
Thanks, Jim.
When you're screening labs coming in, and you see that variability like this one in Washington, do you look at the terpenes at all? And if so, do you see similar, particularly the inflating cannabinoids or also
Yeah, the short answer is probably. So with the terpenes, we haven't done that much looking at the inflation specifically, but we do see indications of that. Because really what people are doing is, right, they want the THC number to be high and they want that total terpene number to be high if it's going to be there. But one thing that they can't do, so there's things in the data that you can see that they just can't get around. So the terpenes, long story short, the terpenes, based on the biology of how they're made, they're going to have statistical properties in the data. Different terpenes correlate with each other in very specific and systematic ways. And we can see differences between labs in that. I can give you just a taste for what that looks like. And there's published literature on this. So there's a group out of University of British Columbia who can make a graph like this. And you can just see, this is just showing you how different terpenes correlate with each other across samples. And there's patterns there that should be there. And some labs can recapitulate those patterns and some labs don't do it as well. So those are things that you can look for as well. So we look at a lot of graphs like that. So I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, there's differences in the labs in the terpene measurements.
From the consumer standpoint, so often patients in particular that don't have access to a patient network to advise them, it's pretty much hit and miss. When they find something that they find works for them, but they want to explore other options. Yeah. So let's say it's Super Silver Haze, and they go to Leafly and locate the profile for Super Silver Haze there. Does it also show similar, cultivars that are close to that? Yes. So that can help them narrow their search for what they want to try next.
Yep. So we do that. Super Silver Haze is actually quite a variable strain, but this is the most common profile associated with it. It's not sharing my screen. But if you go onto the strain page and you scroll down a little bit, there'll be a similar strains carousel. Just like Netflix, right? Similar movies to whatever movie
you may also like.
Yeah. So we have that today. And then you can also do search by similar. And so what that'll do is it'll pre-populate that strain generator tool with the profile for that strain. And then you'll see all the strains that are similar in profile and available nearby.
Right.
And we're going to get more and more specific over time. So we're going to start doing this for individual products and brands. And we're going to get more and more specific with our recommendations based on the feedback that we get from customers and reviews. So if you go to Leafly strain page, you'll see similar strains.
I have a question. When you talk about indicative sativas, do they have a distinction
Yeah.
The land race truly.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that.
Yeah, I think that's my suspicion as well. So like when I show you that graph, so the question is, so when I show you the flowers for Indica sativa hybrid, all I'm able to do with the data is I'm able to say for every sample, what's the strain name that someone chose to give that product, and how is it popularly classified as Indica sativa hybrid? And I'm just averaging across those categories. So what that's really telling you is that there's no average difference between Indica sativa hybrid samples as they're labeled out in the commercial marketplace, right, which is what the consumers are interacting with. Now, to the question, do I think that there might be differences between like the actual like original sort of landrace and heirloom strains out there? And I think there probably are. So if I had to speculate based on the data I've seen, I think one of our lab partners says that the terpinolene ones with CBG, that those are the real sativas. I suspect that if I had the data, if someone could go out and find the land races and we could test them, I suspect that some of those early hazes and some of those early sativas might be terpinolene dominant, might have higher CBG levels. So that could be the way it used to look. I would love to look at that data if I can find it. Maybe some of the early indicas from other parts of the world had a different profile. What that is, I don't really know. But I think there probably was something to that, and it's just sort of been obscured over time. It's an answerable question though, if you have access to those genetics and you look at the profiles.
So I haven't seen potency trends, but down to testing that in the lab.
Gotcha. Yeah, so the question is, do we see potency trends in the data from different labs? And the answer is yes, but it's not so much to do with the methodology they're using. So two different labs, one could be using HPLC version 1, and there's different ways that they do their HPLC stuff. And then for terpenes, someone might be doing GCMS as opposed to another form of mass spec. And if they're doing it right, they should be able to come to comparable measurements. So we see comparable results from labs using different techniques or specific techniques. The difference we tend to see is that some labs generally produce results that tend to be higher. And sometimes in the terpene data, you just see, I suspect people, right, they want to move as fast as possible and get as many samples tested as possible, and often looks for something like they're rushing, and you're just not seeing breaks some of the statistical correlations that you should see in the terpenes. So you see some people that systematically produce higher levels. You see other labs where only some of their samples have higher levels, and it's for specific producer IDs. It looks a lot like they have key accounts that they're giving preferential treatment to. And so you see some of those things. But no, I think in theory, you should be able to get comparable results using different techniques. Good. Any more? Are we out of time? Sorry, we're out of time.
After they can see our camera, okay? Because I can, we don't see it, but it appears we're broadcasting.
Can you guys see our camera online still? All right. Thank you so much, Nick. That was a really great presentation. I know we're running a little bit late, guys, but just bear with us. We have a couple things left to do. Matt and Brent from our HR committee are going to be presenting pesticides and worker safety in Washington cannabis cultivation. So if you want to welcome them up, they're going to do a brief presentation. We'll do a little bit of stuff, and then we'll move on.
This guy first. Okay, hi, I'm Matthew Clark. I have a consulting business called Think Happy Consulting that specializes in compliance and safety here for the cannabis industry. Brent and I are going to do, it's really kind of a two-part. I'm going to talk about pesticides, and he's going to talk more about the L&I side of things. But we'll kind of try to keep it brief, because we do want to be able to answer some questions for you.
Our goal today is just to kind of give you an overview of what your responsibilities are really as an employer. This is something that's not specific to just being cannabis. Cannabis is, you know, a complicated workplace. So as an employer, you do have a certain number of responsibilities, and we just want to kind of try to help raise the awareness about these things. I know traceability, having worked in the industry for many years, I understand that traceability in the LCB tends to get everybody's attention. But we're going to kind of talk about some of the other agencies that have the ability to come and inspect your operation and cost you money and time and other things. Yeah. Oh, no. Okay. Yeah, sure. Is it up?
Yeah, you just.
Okay. I don't see it.
Yeah, you don't, but they
Oh,
do.
okay. Gotcha. So.
Sorry, you aren't seeing it in-house. We're not, for some reason, we're not showing on the screen now. So it seems to be broadcasting now.
So I'll just run through this quickly. Here in Washington, you basically have 3 different bodies that have some say in pesticide regulation. The Liquor and Cannabis Board, which you guys know, that has a lot to do with what pesticides you're allowed to have. But they do have some enforcement abilities, or at least they can bring in other agencies. The Department of Agriculture, they obviously have a lot of things to say about how pesticides are regulated. And I think they're starting to do more enforcement, which is why I think it's one of the reasons I'll be talking about the Worker Protection Standard. And then you have LNI or DOSH, and I'll let Brent talk a lot more about what they do. But they do have some ability to oversee things that have to do with pesticides or chemicals in general also. So, you know, one of the things I find hard when I'm working with customers and getting people to understand is sort of a common understanding of just what a pesticide is. A lot of people tell me all the time, because it's organic or different things, that it doesn't have to follow the same rules as other pesticides or different things. That's not true. The definition of what pesticides are is very broad, and I'll show that to you all in just a moment. So what we're trying to do is, you know, maintain a common understanding of what pesticides are so that we can do the things that we need to be doing training wise and record keeping, housekeeping, all the different things to make sure that you're doing all that stuff properly, proper PPE, all the good stuff. And understanding the regulations, you know, the LCB regulates what can be added to cannabis in the production and processing, but it doesn't address worker safety. LNI regulates worker safety around chemicals and proper applications of pesticides. That includes the Worker Protection Standard. And then the Department of Agriculture, they're going to enforce rules related to what's called the Worker Protection Standard. That has to do with labeling. And if you're using a product that has a specific label, that just automatically triggers a set of rules that you have to follow. So just try to help you understand that. It really all starts when it comes to pesticides or any chemicals with the label. The label is the law. What's on the label is what goes. So it's something, if you are a producer processor, it's a good idea to take a look at the labels that are in your facility. Chemicals like Clonex, pH adjusters, I mean, these are chemicals that'll burn out somebody's eye. So things that we use very commonly in the industry don't really necessarily get the respect that they should for the potential hazards that they have. The important thing with labels too is that all of your employees should be able to recite that information off the label also. So they should, before they ever use a chemical, be trained on how that should work. But if you ever were to have an accident or injury and there's an investigation, they're definitely going to pull those employees to the side, ask them to tell them, if you get this chemical in your eyes, what do you do? If you're exposed to it, you know, what do you do? So it's important that you're preparing people to have the right answer to those things for the liability of your business and obviously to protect the employees. So labels are really important. So especially when you look at something, as we get into the Worker Protection Standard. LNI, I mean, every chemical in your facility should be listed. You should have your accident prevention program. But if you have chemicals present, you should have a chemical hazard communication program that talks about all your chemicals, where they're kept, how you communicate, all your SDS sheets, all that fun stuff. If any of those have labels on them that require personal protective equipment that includes a respirator, that triggers another set of things that you have to be doing, which includes getting the people that use those respirators fit tested, medical evaluations. It's actually a fine to have respirators present if you don't have those other things going. So sometimes people think that they're doing the right thing, but they don't have a full understanding of all of the rules that are involved. And that's something that L&I can get you in trouble for, as well as the Department of Ag. Respirator program. So if you are required to have respirators present by any of the labels and by any of the chemicals on at your facility, then you need to have a written program that talks about how you manage those respirators, how you make sure that the employees are fit tested and their medical evaluations, how you store the respirators, how you maintain the respirators. So it's just another situation where you start one thing, that means there's a lot of other things you have to do also. As far as what the definition of a pesticide, any substance or mixture of substances, including plant regulators, defoliant, desiccants, and spray adjuvants intended to prevent, destroy, control, repel, and mitigate any insect, rodent, snail, slug, fungus, weed, and other forms of plant or animal or virus. So if it's there to control or kill anything, it's most likely considered a pesticide, like I said. And then if that pesticide has what's known as an ag use label on it, that triggers the worker protection standard. And so even though the feds don't want to regulate cannabis, if something that the feds have labeled as for ag use, then that means that you have to follow those rules if you have that chemical present. And that means putting all your employees through an extra set of training. There's quite a few resources out there to do that with the worker protection standard. There's a couple of videos and different ways to do it, but you have to have somebody that's certified as a train-the-trainer. It's something that you can, one of the benefits of having a licensed applicator at your facility is that person can also serve as a trainer for other employees. But these are trainings that everybody should be receiving on day one before they ever do any work, ever touch any product, ever go into a greenhouse. Plus the L&I stuff that should be done on day one too. So this is all based on the products that you actually have present at your facility. So that's a good place to start. But the labels are the law. If the labels are there, then you're going to have to make sure that you're meeting all those. The other big part of the worker protection standard, besides the training, is a central posting location. You have to have a location where everybody that has access to those chemicals can see a number of different things. There's an EPA-approved poster, which I have here if you want to see, that you can get for free, but it has to have that. It lists the nearest medical care. You have to have an application log that lists all of the chemicals that you're applying, the active ingredient, the EPA registration, the last time it was applied. That has to be up for 30 days plus the REI period for every chemical every time you apply. All the SDS sheets need to be in that location, all the proper PPE. So that needs to happen. You need to have that stuff. So it's all, like I said, again, varied on what you have, but being, naive or not knowing all the labels of all the things that you have can put yourself into a bad situation. When it comes to training workers, like I said, there's the PERC, it's called, it's Pesticide Resource Council, I believe. They have got a lot of really good trainings now. There's actually a train the trainer you can do online now for fairly inexpensive to get somebody on staff trained so they could do this. And then there's a lot of great resources. That's a good thing about all these. There are a lot of good resources. You just need to make sure you're doing it. And then, so steps for compliance, starts by taking a list of your chemicals, looking at those labels, making sure that you have the right trainings in place, the right PPE in place, that you have a central posting if you need that you have SDS sheets, that you have all those basic things in place. That's a really good start. So I'm going to turn it over to Brent now, who's going to kind of cover the L&I side of things a little bit more. And then we'll do some more questions and answers.
Hello, everybody. I work for Labor and Industries, Department of Occupational Safety and Health. I was a compliance officer for a couple of years here in King County, and I moved over to our consulting side. So as far as what I was looking at specific to occupational safety and health across all industries, not any one industry. So I commonly find myself on construction sites, manufacturing facilities, restaurants, all that kind of stuff. And Hopefully we'll get the slide deck up in a second here. Anybody tell me what the purpose of having labor and industries in this state is, like why we have L&I? I get laughs. I'm serious.
To deny claims.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's a lot. Right. I hear you. Well, so in my, I've been with us almost 5 years, and I've developed the opinion that is to protect the economy of the state. So Department of Occupational Safety and Health is specific to occupational safety and health.
Broadcasting is not shown on the screen.
Okay, can you get mine up? It's
Is it this one?
yes. Thank you. So basically, in the state of Washington, over 100 years ago, the main industries were logging and fishing. Very dangerous industries. A lot of people died. A lot of people were severely hurt. And what would happen after that happened was you would have a family that was without a breadwinner. They would sue the company. The company would fight giving the family money. The family can't eat. The company's going bankrupt, and both parties are giving money to attorneys. And so the state stepped in and said, this isn't working for our economy, and they created what is called a no-fault system. So if you have an employee or you are an employee and you get hurt at work, if you go to the doctor, as long as it's over a 50% chance that the injury happened at work, they approve the claim. So what that does is it immediately gives health care to the employee, and it prevents, it's illegal for employees to sue their employer. So that's kind of how that comes together. So there's a really neat picture of some old loggers on here. If you can see that, that would be neat. So workplace safety and health, it's a prevention-based system. We got WISHA is the Washington Industrial Safety and Health Act. That is the legislation that gave the Department of Occupational and Safety and Health the authority to make rules and to regulate those rules. You have DOSH, that's Department of Occupational Safety and Health. That's who I work for. L&I is the umbrella organization. DOSH is like insurance services or all those claims. Compliance within DOSH, that is who, if you have an employee that files a complaint or you have an employee that falls off the ladder, the hospital will call us. If you have a customer that sees your employee is not wearing their seatbelt on their forklift, they might call compliance, or a compliance officer could be driving by and they could see a roofer on top of your building with no fall protection and come in. Those are reasons why you would see a compliance officer come in. They're going to have an opening conference with you. They're going to tell you the reason that they're there, and then they're going to say, I need to see your written safety programs, interview your employees, and look at where this accident took place, what have you. All that takes place, and then if they're able to substantiate violations, they'll fine you in addition to telling you what you did wrong and telling you that you have to correct it. We also have a consultation group. That's who I work for now. It's a much more fun place to work. Employers call us. When I get there, it's not a surprise. They have time scheduled for us. We can do full service consultations where we look at all your written programs, look at everything you got, or we can do limited consultations where you say, I would like you to look at our space up here, look at our written programs, and don't go back there because I don't want you to see what's back there, and that's completely fine too. And then we have, just going to kind of move quickly through this as my time is quickly expiring. So, Washington Industrial Safety and Health Act, enacted in 1973 by the legislature, one of 27 states that has our own state program. So in 27, here it's Washington that's regulating your occupational safety and health unless you're in a federal courthouse or at a national park. That's where OSHA is. DOSH is basically OSHA for the state of Washington. There's 27 states where that's the case. We get money from OSHA to fund our program. So what pays for my salary is kind of interesting. I'll point that out real quick. Anybody that has employees, the business and the employees are paying workers' comp. So that's where our money comes from, is your workers' comp. So if you invite a safety consultant to come out, there's no fee. You've already paid for it. So I don't like when people say it's a free service because you're definitely paying for it. Some employer responsibilities in the state of Washington. Number one, there's a general duty clause to provide a safe and healthy workplace while complying with safety and health standards. So if somebody at your work gets hurt and the compliance officer is basically able to say, did you know that standing on a chair could cause you to fall and get hurt? And you're like, well, of course. And you're like, well, you can't allow your employees to do that. You gotta buy a step ladder, train them how to use it, and not allow them to get in chairs. You have to have an accident prevention program. So if anybody doesn't have a written safety manual, that's going to be a problem right at the outset of any type of compliance inspection. They're going to ask your employees, where's your written program? How do you get access to it? What was your safety orientation like? All this type of thing. We have templates on our website that I can direct you to where you basically fill in your company name and go through the front and the back of the safety plan and take out what doesn't make sense for your company and add in stuff that does. You have to post a notice of employee responsibility, employee rights. So those are your workplace safety posters that say minimum wage is this, and if you have a complaint, it's this. It's in a part of this slide presentation, not only to tell you have to have those posters, but so we can tell you that those are free. You can download them from the website. You can get them from the L&I offices in a packet. You get phone calls trying to sell these things for $50 for 2020. Don't ever buy workplace safety posters from that are about employee rights or any official state type messaging comes directly from the state. Provide job related safety and health training. If you have a situation where you want some help with some of the training, I'd be willing to include that as a part of a consultation. Keeping records of all job related incidents. That's a rule too. If you have somebody gets hurt at work, you at least need to try and document that it took place and come up with a reason that it happened and show some type of documentation that you're trying to drive out that cause. So with the chair, we bought, corrective action was buying a ladder and giving ladder training. So Department of Occupational Safety and Health is responsible to develop safety and health rules. We offer training, other resources. I just don't want to cover any of the stuff in detail if there's some better content later on in here. While I'm thinking about it, I brought a few 4 sample cases that I'm willing to explain kind of some common citations that happened to a few companies after this is all said and done. We have 4 different types of consultation. So I'm a safety consultant, so I'm going to come in and look at the stuff that can hurt you today. So like forklifts, racking systems, ladders are one of my pet peeves with folks because they have damaged ladders and ladders are cheap and claims are not. So industrial hygienists, they're going to come in and they'll look at your bloodborne pathogens program. If you work in an area where there's a bunch of issues with needle sticks and that kind of stuff, or they can come in and look at your respirator program, direct you to resources to write those programs and help you understand if you are using respirators, what type of things you might be doing that could get some pretty hefty penalties. We have ergonomics consultants, and we also have risk management consultants. The risk management consultants are more of the numbers people, so they're going to sit down and just give you kind of a PowerPoint presentation, ask you how you classify your employees, what type of rates you're paying or for your employees. Within a safety consultation, we'll review your written programs, identify hazards, do a walkthrough of the work site. If we see somebody doing something that might constitute a violation, we would want to interview the employee and discuss safety rules that relate to your business. Industrial hygienists will also look at chemical use and storage, confined spaces. If you have any areas that are not designed for human occupancy that you have to work to get in or out, there's a whole set of rules that goes behind having people work in those areas. Noise exposures, probably not terribly common in this industry, biological exposures and air quality concerns. So industrial hygienists can come in with dosimeters, and if you have a loud area of your facility, they can test to see if you're responsible to provide hearing protection to your employees, or maybe if you'd rather have a voluntary plan. They can also do air monitoring for areas that may not be well ventilated. If you're doing any kind of fabrication with welding or anything like that, IH consultation would be a good idea. Ergonomics, everybody's basically up to speed on ergonomics. It's just if you got people doing repetitive motions, that's the most common ergonomics consultation, but they also might have ideas of safer ways to store things, safer, better ways to position your work tables and chairs and that type of thing around your facilities. So I also wanted to talk really briefly about risk management consultations, because it can really hit your bottom line. So there's different risk classes for your employers. You have like framers, $5.40 an hour. Logging is pretty much the highest one. $16 an hour goes to the logging workers' comp insurance. Clerical is 15 cents. Auto repair is like $1.53. The thing that I want to explain here is that if you have people that work part-time clerical and part-time in a warehouse, you have to classify those people as warehouse employees and pay the higher workers' comp rate. If they get hurt in your warehouse and you weren't paying warehouse type rates, you could have penalties on top of the claim back charges to pay for these folks' workers' comp. And has anybody ever heard of an experience factor? Does people know what that means as far as your company goes? So I just told you that, like, say framers cost $4 an hour for workers' comp. If one of your framers gets hurt and you have a time loss claim where they can't work, it can drive your experience factor up. So it's kind of like in school when everybody starts off with a 100%. And if you do poorly on a test, then you get lowers your average. Well, over time, if you keep getting 100%, it'll raise your average up to above 100. So if you're paying $4 an hour, somebody gets hurt, it can throw your experience factor out of whack for the entire company. So instead of paying $4 an hour, you might be paying $4.50 an hour times every single employee. Likewise, if you go years and years without time loss incidents, your experience factor can go up. I think I'm telling you the wrong way. And you can pay less per hour than the average people in your industry. So this next slide is a tale of two roofing businesses, and it basically says that both of these businesses' employees work a total of 19,200 hours a year. One has an experience factor of 1.0, so that's average for the industry, and one has an experience factor of 1.5. So the rate class rate for the first company is $7 an hour. For the second company, it's $10.50 for an hour. So after 19,200 working hours, one company's paying $135,000 in workers' comp premiums, the other's paying $200,000. So that's a difference in $66,000 a year. That's real money. It adds up. So kind of the point of that is, if you're not sure how this stuff works, it might be a really good idea to have a risk management consultation so they can explain the number side of you. It's the same as us. It's a fee-free consultation. You're paying for it anyway. And another piece of it is some people have third-party claims administrators, and that's fantastic that those companies are investing in that type of management. But if you're an owner or a operations manager or whatever your position is, a risk management consultation can help you understand what that company's actually doing for you. You might not like the way that they're managing your claims. And likewise, they can help you understand if you're classing your employees correctly. So where to go for help? The safety plan templates are on our website. We just redid our website. It's horrible. I work for the state of Washington, and you know how we do with picking out software providers. So whoever did our new website did a terrible job. I can't find stuff on it. It was updated like a week ago. But that being said, I do know where to find the accident prevention program templates. So if you want a copy of a safety plan, contact me. I got cards in the back. We have sample safety programs. So if you got forklifts in your facility, I can come out and tell you, here's the page that tells you what the training's got to look like. Here's the it's pretty simple, but it's really daunting when you try and go find it yourself sometimes. There's videos for online training, and we have the L&I workshop and training center. Every quarter we have an intro to L&I workshop at the Tukwila branch, where you can come in and get basically what I just did in 30 or 40 minutes. You get 30 or 40 minutes with insurance specialists where they can talk about claims and the rate classing and all that kind of stuff. And that's basically it. So thanks for that.
You have any questions?
So classifications, we have specific classifications for our industry, or we lumped into other general categories?
Lumped into other general categories.
Okay, go ahead.
If you limit in any way, shape, or form the number of safety groups we have employees. And secondly, have you noticed any risks specific to this industry or not specific, that are disproportionately represented in this industry?
No. Safety meeting. If you have less than 11 employees, then you should do a safety meeting a month. If you got more than 11, you should have a safety committee, and meetings are not going to, meet the standard. But as far as specific to this industry, no. I mean, Matt.
From my experience, well, and the problem with the industry right now is nobody wants to talk to him. They're afraid of him still. I've been in a lot of facilities. The big industries that are thing are kind of ergonomics for one, all the stand trimming, pushing people to trim 2 pounds a day, all day, every day, week in, week out. That's why I do ergonomic training. I really encourage people to have stretching and different exercises throughout the day. The other big thing is air quality. What are you breathing in when you're trimming, processing, handling cannabis? And that's the number one question I got even when I was a manager from an average employee. So I think those are two big things that are looming out there for the industry.
From height. So if you've got a single ladder in your facility, or you have any elevated surfaces where people can go, that injury is severe. Really easy to get the right type of equipment for that stuff. Buying secondhand equipment like a forklift, it might have had safety features deactivated on it. Somebody gets hurt as a result of that, you're going to have penalties on top of those kind of claims.
Well, and also be aware, because we're a new industry and we have a lot of new products coming in all the time, just because you bought a piece of equipment does not mean that equipment is properly guarded or actually considered to be safe. I have been to safety conferences where I've seen pieces of equipment that places I've been at used as examples of unsafe equipment. Right? A giant pair of scissors that people are rolling buds around on, how is that guarded or safe? So there's a lot of things out there that these are all potential risks for you to hurt your employees, to cost you a lot of money. I mean, these types of fines are not going to come for your license, but they are going to come for your money, and they don't care about the other set of challenges that you're already facing. You can look all this stuff up. He's got some examples. You can look within this industry. It's all public record. You can find it. You used to be able to find it on their website. You can look up anybody's safety record in the state. And there's definitely people in this industry that have received substantial fines. Usually it's because they don't have anything in place. They're starting from an employee complaint with nothing. And so, yeah, that's why we just want to kind of try to raise awareness. That's the point. I had this poster commission just to try to let you know as an employer, cannabis, I think they're complicated workplaces because you can be in a producer processor that has a grow, a packaging facility, and a lab in the same building. That doesn't happen in a lot of other industries. And so that puts you as an employer having to follow a lot of different rules to make sure you're covering yourself.
So grab one of my cards on the way out. It's a very low impact visit. I'll come in, we'll talk across the table, look at your facility, and see if I can spot anything that may get you into trouble.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, guys. All right, so we're gonna run through some of these. Membership dues increase. So if you are not a licensee, so meaning a retailer, producer, processor, you should have received a phone call and an email from me letting you know that prices were going up this month. If you have not gotten in contact with me, unfortunately, we are going to have to do some fun with your membership and bring you down to the next level until you are able to get in contact. Now, if that's something that you want to work with me today after this meeting, come see me. I can get you completely taken care of, or you can call me, email me. But this is happening. As of November 1st, we have increased those dues, and we'd love to get you guys current. One of the cool things that we've been doing along with these increased dues is we've been reaching out to people and getting more value adds for your membership. So if you're coming in at any of our levels, but specifically at our bronze and gold level, or at our gold and platinum levels, you're getting a bunch of really cool stuff added to it. I have a whole lifestyles plan, little one sheet here that we have over by the door. So please make sure you check it out. Some things, you know, things like advertising in Marijuana Venture Magazine, discounts at Boveda, Headset, one of our new platinum members is going to be doing some stuff. Our newest platinum member, ClickTrack, is going to waive all of your sign-up fees, and for gold and platinum, you're going to get some discounts on your first month. So, you know, really cool thing to check out. It's also on our website, as well as, like I said, we have a little flyer up at the door. Please make sure to take one and take advantage. You know, we're doing these for you. And if you as a business are also interested in maybe giving a value add to our membership, contact me, because I'd really love to get you guys involved and, you know, utilize your membership and give some extra discounts to our membership in general. One of the really, really big things that we as the Alliance, and Laura and I specifically, have been working on is that we have a new website, and we launched it as of yesterday, and it's all bright and shiny and new, and I really, really encourage everybody to go and check it out. We're going to pull it just briefly up onto the website, or up onto the thing so you can see it, but there's a bunch of really cool stuff in here. There's bright, shiny, new everything. As you scroll through, you can get our legislative updates. You can see events coming through. You can see just about anything you want to find. There is also, so if you go on the top of that header bar on every page, you go into the membership drop down, there is and membership benefits. You can actually sign in with your email. You have the Cannabis Alliance, and it'll prompt you to set up a password. And from there, you're going to be able to see all of these wonderful value added benefits and what is applicable to your particular membership level. So there's some really, really cool things. You can get involved with us. You can sign up for membership. You can sign up your friends for membership. So there's a lot of really cool things, and we've spent a really long time on it. So please, please take some time in the next month. Go check it out. Go poke through. If you have any questions, comments, you can always get in contact with us, and we are always here for your input. A big, big shout out to Karen Cooper at Canacytco. They are a member of ours, and they have done a bunch of work for this. So they did all of our templates. They built this all out for us. They've worked with us for probably 3 months solid now, trying to get it all set up. So it's Canacytco, and if you guys are looking for, you know, someone to do your website, please contact them. They're a member, they're a friend, and they do great, great work. So from there, I am going to real quick just send it over to Kim so she can talk about our members.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for staying to the end. We're doing Member Spotlight here, where we just highlight some of our members so you guys can learn about each other's businesses to support each other. Today, just in time for the holidays and tasty treats, we have Wave Edibles is our spotlight. So Wave Edibles' desire is to create high-quality, accurately dosed edibles. Their focus is on hand-dipped artisan chocolates, caramels, and confections. Their products include chocolate truffles, chocolate bars, chocolate sandwich cookies, creamy caramels, and seasonal confections too. They were also a 2018 Dope Cup Award winner. Wave Edibles prides itself on creating the best quality products. In order to drive this, they triple test all of their products for quality, and these results are available on their website. They are located in I-502 stores across the state, and they have a retailer's drop-down list on their website so you can find their products easily. You can also find them through the Cannabis Alliance's member profile and click over to their website. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram, and their website is waveedibles.com. And like I said, I think these will make some pretty good holiday treats. The other thing I want to do very quickly, let's give a big shout out to Wave Edibles. We also want to take a moment to introduce our newest members. First, we want to introduce our newest foundational member, Leafly, who, would you wave for me so everybody remembers? Wave, wave, wave. So we heard from Leafly today. We also want to welcome our newest platinum members. We have ClickTrack. We have Courtney over there. Is Headset here? Headset? We have Mfused. Yep. We got more. We got more. Also joining us new this month at the gold and bronze levels are Doctor and Crook, and they were in the back a little bit ago, I think. Cushio Cannabis Marketing, Lefties Cannabis, the Mathis Cooperative, Wilson Albers and Company. So let's give our newest members a big Alliance welcome.
All right, guys, so here's our last bit. It's all announcements, and if you guys have afterwards, I know we have someone that wants to come up and do some other announcements as well. But we wanted to let you know about some things coming up. So there's a free agriculture business training in Edmonds, Friday the 22nd. If you have questions, come see me afterwards. I can give you the email address, but you're gonna be emailing Nancy Bell. As well as we are going to be at Interchange this year, or this month. So November 20th and 21st, the Cannabis Alliance will be at Interchange, and if you guys are interested, contact Marijuana Venture Magazine, and they can get you guys hooked up and involved. And it's kind of like business speed dating. So, and it's a pretty cool thing. So if you want to get out and see new retailers, producer processors within the industry, come check out Interchange. It's in Renton. It's really, really cool. The very last thing we want to make sure that everybody is with us on is that December is going to be MJ BizCon. So I know Laura mentioned it at the beginning of the meeting, but we are not having our traditional second Thursday meeting here next month. We are going to be live casting it from MJ BizCon in Las Vegas. So it's really easy. It's December 10th at 10 a.m. So it's 10 at 10, and it's going to be in room N206. So please make sure you come check it out. And again, we will not be in this room for next month's meeting. So don't show up. There will be no snacks. Unfortunately, you will be the only ones here. But please, please do. If you don't know how to get our meeting links as a member, you can always check it out live online. And we post it in our Google groups before every monthly meeting. If you don't know what a Google group is and you are not involved, it is an essential part of your membership, and please come see me and I will make sure that you guys get all hooked in, because I can't stress to you how important it is to be involved in that Google group. So that's that. If anybody has any other announcements they want to go through, okay, Jim, and then I know Jed from UW wanted to chat with us as well. So after Jim, Jed can come up and have this conversation.
See, I'm learning here, this is the right place. I made an announcement last month that I was going to be employed with the LCB, and I wanted to rescind that announcement today and let you know that I am not now, nor am I likely to ever be an employee of the Liquor and Cannabis Board. So bad news about that, well, I think I might have been able to help them get better value out of the data they have and perhaps even understand the market they're regulating a little bit better. You know, that's not going to happen, at least for me. However, other bad news, I'm not employed, which I thought I was going to be at this point. The good news is I'm free. So and in a way that I am unencumbered. There's an opportunity at the LCB for somebody else to take, which is good. So, you know, gainful employment. But the fact that I'm free means there's no constraints on what I say and everything. And I've been talking to a few people, Jerry's here, and some others, about possibility of doing a podcast. And I have an idea, because I do believe I've seen a lack of function in the Liquor and Cannabis Board with respect to how they're regulating. Now I've seen a lack of function in how they run their own internal operations. It's just a little tiny view of it, you know, from an almost being an insider for a day. I'm going to run a series of, be they podcasts, high blog posts, or whatever, which is going to go under the aspirational title of Aspiring to Mediocrity. And it's going to be a constructive critique of how the LCB fails to deliver on their mission and goals very consistently, and has done so for a number of years with respect to this industry. Thank you very much. I'm not an undercover LCB operative.
Hi guys, I'm from the University of Washington. We're running a study on marijuana and cannabis during pregnancy. And so we are trying to find people in their first trimester of pregnancy who are not using alcohol or nicotine because previous studies have all been contaminated by other substances. So we're trying to find out what the risks and benefits might be of marijuana by itself. We've run into some trouble because the person in charge of this study says publicly that women's choices during pregnancy should not be judged. Fox News has a problem with that. It's been real fun. But if you guys can help us recruit, spread the word, let people know. It's hard to find people that early in pregnancy. There's flyers in the back there. I have business cards. I would love to make some connections. If anybody wants to introduce yourself, would love to get in touch with someone at Leadsley. That would be great. Come talk to me.
So is there anybody else that wanted to do an upcoming announcement? This is your chance. All right, well, thank you so much, guys, for bearing with us through the extra time. I hope you had fun. You guys feel free to mingle and chat amongst yourselves, and happy Cannabis Alliance meeting, folks.